my favorite executive of all time, and even my company. My favorite executive is Scott Pioli. I'm telling you, I am.
Come on.
No, you know it's true. I love Scott Pioli for many reasons. And so to have you on to ask you these questions, I am so excited about it. So thank you for spending a little bit of time with us.
No, thank you. And thanks for having me. I tell you, when Erica reached out, I was really excited. So thank you very, very much for having me back. It's no, thank you. Appreciate you.
Nitty gritty time. What is it like to interview a coach that you kind of already know what they're about? Like what happens in that room, Scott, that you don't know that you need to figure out?
It depends really on how well you know them, not just as a football person, not just as a team builder and coach, but as a person. So, there are a couple different situations in terms of interview circumstances I've been involved with. And when you know someone, it's a little bit easier, right? But it's easier for you, but maybe sometimes tougher for them because you know them, they don't know where it's going to go. Because when you're sitting in there, you're sitting in with an owner, you're sitting in with other people that are going to help you make the decision because it's never just one person that makes the decision. So it's and you don't I was never in a situation where I would want to give that person the answer to the questions, if that makes sense. So the most important thing you have to be careful is that if you know someone, that you don't miss important topics and questions that need to be asked that you're going to be asking for other candidates, if that makes sense.
How much of an interview is culture? How much is scheme? And is it different regarding who the person is?
That's a fascinating question, Bobby, because to me, the least amount of time should be spent on scheme. Because most people that ascend to a position of having an opportunity to be a head coach, they've got a scheme. They've done something in their former job, whether usually a coordinator, where they know the scheme, they have their scheme. And the truth is this, I think that there's, I coached for 4 years before I became an evaluator and a scout and then a front office person. And I played all of my life up until that. So I knew the game. But I also know that coaches know the game on a different level than many of us that are in other areas. And I say this because I think that there's a lot of people that get into those situations, those circumstances where they know a little bit and they think that they know more than they do. So asking a coach about scheme, too many questions, you can ask generic questions, but you don't want to dive deep into it. Most of the time is more spent on culture. I think it's spent on relationships. Because the most important part of the scheme that you have to understand is the base elements so you can go out and find players. And regardless of the power structure and the hierarchy, and that stuff doesn't matter. Because the moment that the head coach is hired, I'm a firm believer that the general manager, vice president, player personnel, whatever that person is, they automatically become a servant to the coach to go and find the players that fit their scheme and fit their personality. Not people that are the same personality, but are actually that are personality types that can follow the type of leadership that comes in. I give great example is when I was the assistant general manager working under Thomas Dimitroff, our general manager at the Falcons, the players that Dan Quinn was looking for schematically were not only different, but they were different personality and makeup type players that were for Dan Quinn versus Bill Belichick, for instance.
Are there times where, and it's interesting you brought that up because that was what I was curious about. Are there times where guys come in and you know who your personnel is? I mean, Caleb Williams would be an example. Now, whenever Ben Johnson's coming, whomever it's going to be, that's the quarterback. So you're looking for a coach that is going to be able to utilize the personnel that you have versus there could be a coach that's going to come in and just go, we're going to start from scratch. Like both of those are options when talking to certain coaches, right?
Yeah, they are both options. And I think that's where you have to leave your personal ego at the door, because if you're going to, you plan on entering these head coaching relationships for the long term. And if you try to fit your head coach into a certain scheme or certain specifications of what your old staff was, that's not fair to the person that you're trying to hire. And really what you have to do is go out and hire the best person available, the best coach, the best teacher, the person who's best at player development. And some of the best players can play regardless of the scheme they can play. But the thing is, really good coaches can take players and accentuate the positive and limit the limitations because every player has limitations. So sometimes it really needs to be a combination of those two things. And you can't get rid of good players that are hard workers just because you have to find a way to meld those two things together, but not be stuck in. I think you may be setting a relationship up for a problem. These are the guys that I drafted before. These are the guys that I brought in. So I've got to find Coach X that has these little, these certain things and force your program to go in a situation that you think is best because it makes your life more comfortable than doing what's best for the organization.
I think what would be difficult too, but also like put a ribbon on the Lions because they were so good that both coordinators go and take head coaching jobs, right? You got DC going to the Jets, OC going to the Bears. They both have their own teams now, but now you're a head coach and also you have all of the executives there and you're trying to find an offensive coordinator and a defensive coordinator at the same time. That seems like that would be tough.
Yeah, attrition is one of the pitfalls of great success, and when you have success, there will be attrition, natural attrition, but it's both a blessing and a curse, right? When those people are leaving, that means you've done something well. But here's what's important, I think, is Dan Campbell has a really strong reputation and people want to work with and for Dan. But where they have great alignment, I believe in that organization is Brad Holmes, their general manager, and some of the people that are helping. Sheila does an amazing job of letting people do their job. She doesn't act like she knows things that she doesn't know, but she does have an important amount of intelligence and leadership ability. And then you look through the rest of the organization, there's folks like Mike Disner, there's folks like Chris Spielman, who are important, Ray Agnew. They have a lot of really good people in an organization. And Brad Holmes, who's the leader as the general manager and the personnel side, he and Dan are completely aligned on the types of players that they want to bring in and that they're trying to bring into their program. So that is going to make the talent acquisition. I always talk about things in terms of, people always focus so much on player evaluation and player acquisition. Really, it's about talent. Because if you're building something that's going to last and you're thinking about your entire football operation, you're thinking about talent in terms of coaches, your football operations people, your support staff. So that idea of talent identification, talent acquisition, and talent development and retention, Brad and Dan are aligned. So my guess is that, it's going to be a hit, but they've got some people that are looking to work there or that they can elevate from within.
I wear a bunch of hats if it's radio or TV or podcasting or books or whatever. I have to hire people all the time for all different jobs. And I was explaining to the guys, and it started with the Rooney Rule of how important I think it is, even if you don't hire someone, to get a lot of people in the room, because it's not even about that moment right there. It's about a relationship maybe begins and you learn about them and their maturation as a coach or an employee. In my world, they're not there yet, but man, they are on a trajectory too, and you kind of follow along and it builds for later. And I've hired so many people a year after an interview for a different job, 2 years after. So will you talk about that in terms of what you do when you interview coaches that probably aren't going to get the job?
Well, I love this, but it's not just head coaches, right? It's assistant coaches. Not that, I ever hired assistant coaches, but I was around and in a part of that. And Bobby, I love that you're bringing this up because really what's happening in the football world, it's the same in your industry, right? You want to get the right people that have talent, but they have more than just, we always talk about height, weight, speed, but talent comes in different packages. And you talk about the Rooney Rule, and I just want to touch on this. The importance and the value of diversity is so critical because people sometimes get so myopic when they hear the idea of diversity or the Rooney Rule, and they see this as something that is just color. They literally see it as black and white. But the purpose and the reason for diversity and bringing in diversity and diverse hiring is not just in addition to what it looks like. People come from different backgrounds and different cultures. They bring with them different thoughts, ideas. And we all have this thing called implicit bias, right? And they're bringing these ideas and these thoughts. What you're looking for is diversity of thought, diversity of action. And when you spend time with people in these interviews, sometimes the timing isn't right for whatever reason. Sometimes you don't have the appropriate job for a person. But I can tell you for sure, I think about someone like Monty Ossenfort, right, who's now the GM of the Cardinals. Monty came in. I interviewed him. We didn't hire him immediately. The next year went back to him, and this was for a scouting assistant position. And then Monty came to us. He worked for us, and then he left. But then he came back because the circumstances and the situation. There has to be this marriage of circumstances being right. I always talk about player development and quarterback development being circumstantial, right? It takes a village. And there's often been very talented quarterbacks to come into this league that are brought into the wrong circumstance of development, whether it's the head coach, whether it's the staff, whether it's the culture, whether it's the talent around that person, they don't get the chance to develop. And I know this is related to the exact question that you were asking, is making sure that you're bringing people in under the right set of circumstances so you can develop them.
One of my friends, we now work together for NFL. They hired us together, but is Matt Castle. And was talking to Matt literally yesterday. He was at the house. And so it's super cool. NFL hired us. We do a show together. And first of all, it's annoying because he's like tall and good looking and like it's so annoying. He get all the traits. But he was talking. Right. I asked him, I said, who on your headstone, like who would be your team? Because he had the Patriots, he had the Chiefs, and then he had a couple bounce arounds. And he said it would be the Patriots because here's a guy, and he said this, that never started in college and was drafted and was kept around by an organization and then given a chance. And that chance, he won 11 games that year and was able to go. And you ended up trading him to Kansas City because there was value there and you had your quarterback back. So what would you say about Matt Castle? What did you see in him? Because again, not just about Matt, but why a quarterback that's never played? What did you identify within him?
I love this question, and I love this person. First of all, Matt, I adore Matt and his family, right? And so here's the thing: we had a scout out there who I was out at USC, and he said, and they had during Matt's time there, they had back-to-back Heisman Trophy winners, two quarterbacks. They was Leinart and
Reggie Bush,
Palmer,
or was it? No, was it?
Okay, at quarterback. I mean, starting ahead of him.
Got it.
There was this guy that Matt Russell, who was our West Area scout, had brought him up. He mentioned him, and then another scout mentioned to just brought him up. Wow, they've got so much talent there. And here's the thing about programs like that: USC at that point in time had backups who could play in the NFL and should have been drafted. I mean, heck, Clay Matthews III he sat the bench for 4 years, didn't play until his senior year. But I remember being there at practice and I was watching the quarterbacks throw and I'm watching this guy Castle, who was a senior. And I was like, this guy's interesting. He had the prototype body, looked good, in terms of quarterback, what you're looking for, threw the ball well. And he had this really good energy about him. Then as practice starts, this guy's wearing like one of those pullover pennies on the kickoff coverage scout team. He's doing anything and everything. And then at their pro day, he threw. And we're firm believers in player development and the value of drafting a quarterback, trying to draft a quarterback every year to bring in and develop, because you never know what you're going to be able to develop and or find. In Matt, we found a guy who was smart, who was dedicated, who loved the game, willing to do anything and everything. And we said, well, at worst, this guy might be able to be a really good backup quarterback. That's what we thought of him coming out. Draft him in the 7th round. And you're right. He becomes a starter when Brady gets hurt. He helps us win 11 games and traded for him. And people, I think Matt ended up doing 14 or 15 years in the league. And when he was in Kansas City, when Charlie Weiss was our coordinator that year, Matt threw for 27 touchdowns and only 7 interceptions, went to the Pro Bowl, and we won the division. Matt was also, here's why I say Matt's really smart. Matt was acutely aware of what he could do and what he couldn't do. He trusted the coaches around him when he was at his best. He trusted the coaches around him to put him in a position to succeed and not fail. And I know that sounds so basic and generic, but players aren't always put in a position in order for them to succeed. And when Matt was put in that position, he had a great deal of success.
So I know Matt's going to hear this, and I hope he's going to, whatever, he's going to hear it. So I'm going to compliment him, and it's annoying because Matt's my friend, and it's weird to compliment your friends openly and outwardly. Whenever we started to work together, and I'm wondering if this is a trait with successful quarterbacks, is where I'm getting. Matt was like, hey, I want to get good at this. And I was like, cool. Everybody says they want to get good at everything. It's easy to say you want to get good at something. It's hard to actually put in the work and take the critique or the criticism that leads to positivity afterward, because some people don't have the stomach or the skin for it. And so, I will evaluate. I will go, and I did all this work on game tape, I call it, like our shows. I evaluated everything I was doing, Matt was doing. I was like, here's how we're going to grow. Here's what we did low. And I sent him this whole report. And afterward, we had finished working, and we're just walking and talking. And he was like, man, I appreciate that so much. I read this. I'm going to do this. And I'm going, man, if this is like the successful quarterback way of working, I need to have more successful quarterback friends, because he just wanted to learn. It wasn't criticism. It could have been taken as that, but it was what I saw as tools for growth. And like within like 12 hours, he was doing everything that was written there for him.
And so, Bobby, we could talk about this for hours. You are nailing it. It's going back to what I was talking about, making sure that you have the right people and in the situation, the circumstance, and the culture in which you're going to develop them. At the New England Patriots, we knew what we were, right? It was uncomfortable. It was emotionally draining at times. It was a lot. We were a lot. And we understood that there was a certain type of makeup and mentality and emotional and mental endurance that was necessary. We knew Matt had that. And we intentionally looked out for players. Again, we look for prototypical skills, tools, all of that stuff, but there was a certain type of makeup that was required. And you are nailing it when you talk to Matt. You sent him that. It's not, you're right, he's not thin-skinned. And because you can't survive, never mind survive, but you can't develop and survive in that program the way it is. Wrong or right, fair, unfair, that's what the program is. We had to find certain people. I love that you're telling that story, because that was one of the things about Matt. There were times where it could get too rough, and I saw that happen to him at times where, that's a very fine line between critique and criticism and over-the-top criticism. And there were times, over his career at different teams, I saw it, it got too much at times, and he would pull back, but he received that. And you telling that story about him, those are the type of people that you look for, because I don't think anyone hires someone. You're not bringing him on as a partner to make his life uncomfortable or unhappy, right? You want to succeed together. So when you're giving him feedback, you're really doing it not just for him, but for the greater good.
Yeah, I wondered, is that a trait of the most successful, I won't even say quarterbacks, but NFL players?
Wow. Some of the most successful that I've been around, and again, at the Patriots, at the Chiefs, those were the type of personalities and the makeup that we had to hone in on. Again, under Dan Quinn, there was a different style, equally as effective. Dan's a great coach, and I love Dan. Dan approaches things, and his staff approach things a little bit differently. So we didn't have to focus on that as much. Now, I'll say this, though. They had to be equally as tough and equally as smart as what we looked for at the Patriots. That's for sure.
Players coach versus the non-players coach. Is that even a thing anymore?
I honestly never understood the players coach thing, right? Because you ask different people, it means different things. Back in the day when I used to hear people say a player's coach, those players were the type of people who didn't want to be held accountable, right? But I think it has a different definition now. And I think it's just, they're looking for someone to be more relatable and more what the word is deemed to be respectful. Not that it wasn't respectful in the past, but I think I always have to figure out when I hear someone say they like a player's coach, again, is that someone who's saying they're being respectful or they're not holding me accountable?
How do you feel about assistants interviewing while they're still in the playoffs?
I think it's a bad thing. And here's what I'll say is it's the blessing and the curse, because at the years of the Patriots, we were constantly getting requests for coaches to be interviewed. Same thing when we were at the Falcons looking for DQ. DQ was in the, we couldn't talk to him until afterwards, but because he was with Seattle, it's a real distraction. But I don't know what the right answer is. We can sit here and say, well, we have to wait until after the playoffs. Well, if you wait after the playoffs, here's the reality, and we all know this. I mean, let's call it what it is. There's going to be tampering. There are going to be people finding ways to circumvent and/or break rules, even if they're not having direct contact with a candidate. All of these candidates have close friends. They have agents. They have people out there. They have touch points of people. So to me, I don't know what the right answer is. I think is if we do something where we wait until everyone has to wait until after the playoffs or the Super Bowl to be interviewed, we have to understand that rules are going to be broken. And as a league, we are going to have to be willing to enforce those rules, because there are sometimes we've seen where rules are out there, they're not fully enforced, and then it becomes a charade.
All right, 3 final questions. What's it like the week of the Super Bowl for the head exec? Because I know what it's like for a player. I've talked to them. What are you dialing in double, or are you sitting back chilling double?
No, there's no chilling, because you're working on the next season. You're still having draft meetings. Because when you get done at the Super Bowl, it's February, and this whole idea and concept that coaches are involved. If you're in the Super Bowl, coaches don't see prospects that you're going to draft in April. They don't see them until February, right? Because as soon as the season's over, they also get a week off or 2 weeks off, not the head coach, but the assistant coaches. So you're preparing for free agency. You're preparing a plan for the salary cap. You're preparing a plan for the draft. This way, when the season, I'll never forget, after our first Super Bowl, Belichick and I are flying back. We're flying back from New Orleans, and we're huddled up together, because that was the year. Actually, they were. I want to say it was the year before the Texans came in. We had just won the Super Bowl. We were heading back to Boston, and here we were trying to decide on the 6 players that we were going to put out there as being players that were available for the expansion draft. And there's always work to be done. If you're an executive or a front office person and you're chilling before the Super Bowl, I mean, the Senior Bowls is going to be, the AFC Championship, NFC Championship are this weekend. The Senior Bowl's going on. I'm right down here at the East West right now. I'm leaving from here to go to the Senior Bowl. You're working on the future. And if it's one of those things I look back retrospectively, so blessed to go to 5 Super Bowls. I look back at those times. Part of me says, I wish I would have enjoyed those moments more. But quite honestly, if I was enjoying those moments, I would not have been serving my teammates, meaning the group that I worked with, and the ownership and the fan base very well.
All right, final 2 questions. Who is your favorite, I should say most proud of draft pick that wasn't a first rounder, but 4th, 5th rounder that ended up like you bet on him and it turned into the real deal?
I can't give you a favorite. That's like saying I only have one child, so I can say who's your favorite child. I can honestly say my daughter Mia is my favorite child. But it's like we were so fortunate. There were so many different. I mean, the easy answer for everyone else is, it has to be Brady, who you drafted in the 6th round. Well, and not me specifically. We drafted in the 6th round. But I think of guys like Dan Copen. I think there were a lot. You just brought up Matt Castle. Here's a guy we drafted in the 7th round, had a 14-year career. I was a part of the group that drafted Grady Jarrett in the 5th round. I mean, I wish I'd have prepared for this, but there's David Givens. I was so proud of that guy. The list goes on and on. I mean, I know I'm not coming up with the name. Danny Copen was a terrific one. I don't know how many folks remember Danny Copen, but center that was so important to us, at the Patriots in those championships.
That'll work. You gave us 7 names. I don't have any names. You gave us 7. No, you gave us plenty. That was great. You're at the Shrine Bowl. So that's in Dallas, right? You're at Jerry's World. That's where. So what do you do out there? Like, what's the goal?
So actually, I do some consulting work for the league, and part of what they ask me to do is they bring me down here and also to the Senior Bowl, and I spend time. I come down early. The players are arriving right now as we're speaking, but I spend time meeting with a lot of the coaches because there's a lot of young assistant coaches that they bring to that coach these games, and I'm here as a resource for them and to spend time with them because they all have aspirations to do something more. So I spend time visiting with them, talking about the NFL, their future. A lot of questions I get. It's a little mentoring work, and quite honestly, I do get some folks that reach out as they're looking to hire people and they want to know some of the people. And I have, I'm a scout, so I'm keeping my notebook over here and evaluating some of these people and how they run meetings. I sit in on meetings. I listen to install. I listen to how they're interacting with players. I watch how they're interacting with players. But then I also spend time with players. So it's work that I do that's mentoring and helping these younger coaches build for their future.
The final thing, the family fund for women coaches and scouts. Why are you so passionate about this? And I know this is very important to you. Kind of explain what it is.
Yeah. So I'll give you the background on how it started. And I don't. Do you remember Katie Sowers?
I do.
The coach. All right. So Katie was our daughter's 5th grade basketball coach. That's how I got to know Katie. And when we hired Katie at the Atlanta Falcons, it was I brought her in as an intern, then we were going to keep her on full time. We offered her a job, but the salary wasn't enough because it was only going to be a 1-year coaching thing. And she had home car payments in Kansas City, which is where she was living. And she needed help with living expenses if she was going to take this job. So my wife and I ended up paying for her apartment. And that year that she worked with us when we went to the Super Bowl. And it was this thing that came into our minds during this time because I'm going to be quite honest here. When it's time for young men to get jobs, most coaches can say, hey, come stay at our place, come stay here. There's different perceptions of the circumstances when you say to a woman, hey, come stay at our house, right? It's one of the many, many, many things that is so unfair. So my wife and I decided to endow this fund at the Women's Sports Foundation. I'm on the board of the Women's Sports Foundation. Billie Jean King is a dear friend and mentor of mine. And this scholarship, or it's a grant, is in place for young women who are going to be coaches or scouts in the early part of their career, enables them to have an opportunity to take care of the bills that living expenses and helping pay for their rent, because there are obstacles that they have that are different. And I look back, Jennifer King, who's been a full-time coach in the NFL for years, she was one of our first recipients. Jennifer was up at Dartmouth coaching for the late great Buddy Tebens, and she was going to make $4,000 that fall. But she was able to get money in order to take that job. She was a head basketball coach, head women's basketball coach, won an NAIA championship, quit her job and wanted to coach ball. She needed help. So that's a large part of what this is for.
And for more information, you guys go to womensportsfoundation.org. Scott, you're my favorite. Matt and I will be down at the Super Bowl in New Orleans if you're around. We'd love to see you.
Heck yeah.
You'll see us. We're the 2 really good looking guys that are walking around, 2 athletic, good looking guys. You can't miss us. Scott, seriously, you're my favorite, and hopefully I will see you soon. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Bobby. Appreciate you, man.
See you, Scott.